me, it looks like it's in play. I'm Dan Dorfman.
Incidentally, in trading of U.S. stocks in London, American Brands is down 0.75 points. Our international report is next. First, freedom may be around the corner for Gerald Seib. Here's Reid Collins with that. Good morning, Reid.
Good morning, Bill. It looks as if the Wall Street Journal reporter Seib is coming home soon. He was arrested in Tehran last Saturday and accused by the Iranian government of being an Israeli spy. This morning, Iran's Prime Minister Mousavi says Seib's to be expelled in the next couple of days. Seib had been detained when his visa expired. He had spent 10 days there with the other foreign journalists who had been invited in by the Khomeini regime to cover the war with Iraq. The America's Cup is finally coming home. This is certain. Dennis Conner and the crew of the Stars and Stripes breezed to a fourth straight win over Australia's Kookaburra 3 this morning. It was a $15 million three-year quest for Conner, the only American skipper to lose the Cup in its 135-year history. 1,900 Marines are en route from Spain now to join that growing fleet of ships patrolling the waters between Cyprus and Lebanon. Pentagon sources are stressing this group has no orders preparing for any military operation, but the terror groups ashore in Lebanon say any invasion would be the death warrant for the hostages. Saudi Arabia agreed to fund American-supported anti-communist rebel groups as part of the 1981 arrangement to buy the sophisticated AWAC planes, the New York Times reports today. Their story says the Saudis tried to funnel $15 million to the Nicaragua Contras in 1984 and 5. But congressional investigators could not determine exactly what happened to that money. That's it from here, Bill.
Thanks, Reid. An active day in Tokyo, 1.5 billion shares traded on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. The market ended mixed with the Nikkei Dow picking up just 7.
And take a sneak peek at Black Widow. Then get tips from an expert on bringing out the best in your baby on Take 2 at noon Eastern on CNN.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
I think it's terrific. The best thing that could have happened to San Diego. I really do. It's going to be terrific for San Diego. Let's keep it here.
USA! 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 The Stars and Stripes have made it 4 in a row, and the roar in the San Diego Yacht Club could be heard in the outback. The America's Cup was America's once more. And the American reporter Gerald Seib is to be expelled from Iran.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Wednesday, February 4th. With Reid Collins in Washington and Molly McCoy and Brian Nelson in Atlanta.
Good morning. The Stars and Stripes made it a clean sweep today, beating Kookaburra 3 for the 4th time without a loss and retrieving the America's Cup from its 3-year stay down under. The margin in this 4th race was nearly 2 minutes' time, and it was look ma, no hands for the skipper Dennis Conner, redeeming himself after losing the Cup in '83. For the rest of the world, it is back to the drawing boards and to the bank. And we'll have the complete story of the final race for the America's Cup in sports just coming up. Iran's Prime Minister said that Gerald Seib, the Wall Street Journal reporter held in Tehran and accused of spying, is to be expelled from that country within 2 or 3 days. Seib was arrested this weekend after being invited into Iran with several other foreign journalists. Yesterday, Tehran radio was saying that Seib was a spy for the Zionist regime, meaning, of course, Israel. But today, the Prime Minister, Mir Hossein Mousavi, said that Seib's case had been clear after investigations were made, and he's going to be allowed to leave Iran soon, in fact, kicked out. Mousavi said Seib had collected what he called abnormal information on the Iran-Iraq battlefront, but he did not elaborate on this. Seib's editors and family called his detention a dreadful mistake, a complete mystery. Round-the-clock vigil for Seib was kept at the Roman Catholic prep school in Kansas, where he had studied. This morning, there's been no immediate comment from the Wall Street Journal, the State Department, or the Swiss Embassy in Tehran that looks after U.S. interests there. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations has called a press conference at the UN for later this morning, topic unannounced, but presumably there will be questions on the Seib affair. 1,900 more U.S. Marines have been ordered out of Spain and sent toward Lebanon this morning to join the growing American battle group patrolling within 100 miles of Beirut in the eastern Mediterranean. The Pentagon says there's no attack planning in the works, but it is prudent to show the flag in waters given the increased tensions in Lebanon. Muslim kidnappers have threatened they'd kill their hostages if the U.S. force, now up to 25 combat ships, launches any attack. The missing hostage envoy Terry Waite may be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. British lawmakers say they're planning to nominate him for the hostage-freeing efforts he has made. Waite, though, disappeared, reportedly working to free the foreign captives. Last time he was seen in the West was in January the 20th. For the first time in 2 years, U.S. and Soviet delegations at the Geneva arms talks are now working on the framework of some actual treaty. But the head of the Soviet delegation, Yuri Vorontsov, said progress is being made and may not be substantive. Vorontsov says U.S. insistence on continuing research into the space-based missile system remains the barrier to any all-out arms control treaty. And the Soviet Union says yesterday's American nuclear test in the Nevada desert will prompt a resumption of Soviet testing, or at least will clear the way for it. The Soviets have been maintaining their own moratorium for 18 months in the hope that the United States would be forced to join in. TASS says the American decision to keep testing led the world to balance on the brink of the nuclear precipice.
It's 4 minutes past the hour now. There's debate within the administration over Star Wars. At a White House meeting, Defense Secretary Weinberger pressed hard yesterday for early deployment of the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, designed to protect the nation against missile attack. But Secretary of State Schultz told a Senate hearing that early deployment might violate terms of the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty with the Soviet Union.
If we or the Soviets wish to deploy something other than the point defense of the nature of the one they've deployed around Moscow, we would either have to get agreement to modify the treaty or exercise our rights to withdraw from it, or they would.
Schultz said no decision on SDI deployment is expected this year, and he said reports of his differences with Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger are usually exaggerated.
In about an hour from now, the Congressional Budget Office releases a report on how to cut the federal deficit. And among the options, cancellation of plans to build an orbiting space station and a replacement for the Shuttle Challenger. However, NASA Administrator James Fletcher says canceling those plans is unthinkable. Fletcher told Congress yesterday that both projects are essential if this nation is to regain space supremacy. But the NASA chief admitted that the $8 billion price tag for a space station was based on guesswork. $13 billion is more in the ballpark, Fletcher said. And plans for a permanent space station might have to be slowed down and cut back because of cost overruns.
5.5 minutes past the hour now. Valerie Vall seems unusually calm today. Maybe that has something to do with the weather. Good morning, Valerie.
Are you trying to tell me I'm asleep, Molly? We're looking at our precipitation outlook. There has been a little bit of light snow across northern selected cities around the country.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Wednesday, February 4th. With Reid Collins in Washington, Molly McCoy and Brian Nelson in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
The sweet taste of revenge may be even sweeter when you drink it from the America's Cup. And here's CNN's Dennis Dumler and more on Captain Dennis Conner breaking out the victory champagne.
Probably doing a lot of that, Reid. The America's Cup is headed back to the United States. After losing the Cup to Australia in 1983, it has been Dennis Conner's sole task in life to win it back. And today he has done just exactly that. In a 4-race sweep over the Australia Challenger Kookaburra 3, Stars and Stripes out of the San Diego Yacht Club led at the beginning of the race by just, you can see it, a small margin, but that's the first time during the series that Stars and Stripes has gotten up to the lead. It didn't take long for them to grab a big lead, though. At the end of the first leg of the race, Stars and Stripes up their lead to 26 seconds. All the tacking or zigging and zagging Kookaburra tried to make up ground was to no avail. The Aussies just couldn't catch Stars and Stripes, who steadily won this one by a final margin of 1 minute and 59 seconds, and needless to say, that is a huge margin. Dennis Conner and Stars and Stripes. Now, the San Diego Yacht Club, as we said, is the home base for Stars and Stripes, and the parties are possibly still going on there. Last night, about 700 folks piled in. Included in the revelers were Mayor of San Diego, Maureen O'Connor, and Senator John Denver. 11 televisions set up for those folks to whoop it up. The place in San Diego packed. In San Diego, though, not the only place in the world where celebration was going on. Needless to say, even though the Americans were outnumbered in Fremantle, Australia, our Michael Cowman says there was plenty of happiness there.
It was a triumphant return to the Fisherman's Harbor for the Stars and Stripes. Dennis Conner in his Gunsmoke Blue 12-meter could finally heave a sigh of relief. It had been total domination in the waters off Fremantle. In 1983, Conner had to watch as the Australians celebrated in Newport. Now it was his turn.
I'm a little numb right now. I'm sure it'll set in later. It's great to be here. Thank you.
At what point out there did you know that you had it?
When we crossed the finish line.
Kookaburra 3 skipper Ian Murray saved some of his best sailing for the final trip home, dodging spectator boats in the harbor with a full spinnaker. It was an emotional return for the 28-year-old who had tried so hard, yet had come up short. He had carried the weight of his entire country, and his countrymen showed their appreciation.
I'd just like to thank them all for persevering with us and coming down and supporting with us. And I think of the people that are down here and the support they've given us is what Australia's all about. It's the best country in the world.
I think it's a great moment for America, and a great moment for the Stars and Stripes team, and a great moment for the Stars and Stripes crew, and a great moment for Dennis Conner.
We tried as hard as we could, and unfortunately we didn't win a race.
I know that it'll probably all sink in tomorrow or the next day or the week after, our accomplishment. But right now we're just savoring it. We're thrilled to be here, and we're just thrilled it all worked out for us. And I guess I'll do better tomorrow, but it's the best I can do right now.
Now the sun has set on Fremantle, but the celebration continues into the night, both downtown and on cruise ships like the Sea Goddess behind me. It was nearly 3.5 years ago that Dennis Conner became the first American to lose the Cup. Now he's traveled halfway around the world and gained his revenge. So what lies ahead? Well, a brief period of rest, and then it's back out to sea for more racing. But first, a very important stop on Friday when he'll be presented with the America's Cup. In Fremantle, Australia, I'm Michael Cowman, CNN Sports.
Once again, repeating, Stars and Stripes has won back the America's Cup 4 races to none over Kookaburra 3. Back to you, Reid.
Thank you, Dennis. I guess they don't have to row at home. Iran's news agency says the Wall Street Journal correspondent Gerald Saib has been expelled from the country. The news agency saying this action came after a probe of Saib's case was completed. Now, Saib was seized on Saturday, accused of being a spy for Israel. He'd been among a group of reporters recently invited to Iran to cover the war. Earlier today, Iran's Prime Minister Mousavi had said that Saib would be expelled in 2 or 3 days. An armada of U.S. Navy ships between Cyprus and Lebanon is getting even larger. The Pentagon says a 1,900-man Marine strike force has left Spain on its way to the area. This amphibious group will add another 5 vessels to the 2 carrier task force groups already in the eastern Mediterranean.
A published report says Saudi Arabian officials agreed to help the Nicaraguan Contras and other anti-communist groups as part of a 1981 deal to buy AWACS radar planes. The New York Times quotes current and former U.S. officials familiar with the deal, none of whom were identified. But the paper says it could not find out who proposed the idea or why it was planned in 1981 before Congress banned U.S. aid to the Contras. Another published report says former National Security Council aide Oliver North knew about secret arms shipments to the Contras last April. A former Green Beret told the Miami Herald he told North about the airdrop. 3 days later, the paper reports North briefed President Reagan on Central American policy. At the time, U.S. military aid to the Contras was illegal.
Moscow is calling the first U.S. nuclear test of the year, quote, an outrageous act that threatens efforts to end the nuclear arms race. The official Soviet news agency TASS says yesterday's test in the Nevada desert could prompt Moscow to resume its own nuclear testing with, quote, redoubled force. The test was done just as American and Soviet negotiators in Geneva, Switzerland wound up a round of talks on testing. Some lawmakers say the test sends the wrong message to Moscow.
How could you possibly have your own, quote, negotiators negotiating? And have a test the day before. I mean, what that says to the world about thumbing your nose at everything is devastating.
Arms race, which has never slowed down, only now continues to be pushed faster because the Soviets will have to continue their testing program to keep up with the administration.
The Soviet news agency TASS says the U.S. held the test earlier than expected to avoid anti-nuclear protesters. The early test did catch the protesters off guard, but a spokesman for Greenpeace says the demonstration will be held tomorrow, the day the test had been expected. Activists had hoped to stop the nuclear test through mass civil disobedience.
Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger and the Secretary of State George Shultz are at odds over President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. Weinberger yesterday pressed for early deployment of the so-called...
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
There's plenty to celebrate as the America's Cup sets sail for the United States.
In Miami, a former racing champion and powerboat designer is shot dead, and no one seems to know why. Welcome to Newsday. I'm Bella Shaw.
And I'm Don Miller in Atlanta.
I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. The United States naval buildup in the Mediterranean continues. Increasing fears of a military strike against Lebanon may be in the works. A 5-ship assault force with 1,900 Marines on board left its Spanish port early. It's traveling east now to link up with 22 American warships already plying the waters between Cyprus and Lebanon. The White House is denying there are any plans for a military strike in response to the hostage crisis. Spokesman Marlin Fitzwater urged reporters to keep things in perspective today. He says the forces are there strictly to protect U.S. interests and support friends in the region.
The wives of 4 of the hostages asked the captors to provide specific medical care for the hostages. The wives of Robert Polhill, Alan Steen, Jesse Turner, and Mitileshwar Singha made the appeal in a Beirut newspaper. They specifically mentioned Polhill's diabetes and Singha's heart problems. In Rome, Pope John Paul II called the situation in Lebanon an unending tragedy. He told those attending his weekly general reception that Church of England envoy Terry Waite is in his prayers. And in Lebanon, there is word that Waite was seized as a statement against negotiations between Iran and the United States. Muslim sources say Waite is being held in Beirut and has not been moved to the Bekaa Valley.
The State Department today says it can't yet confirm reports that reporter Gerald Saib is being expelled from Iran. Saib's the Wall Street Journal correspondent detained Saturday in Iran and charged yesterday with being a spy for Israel. The official Iranian news agency today says Saib's been expelled from that country and will leave tomorrow. Iran's prime minister said that Saib was, quote, engaged in certain investigations and collecting intelligence at the war front. The United States insists Saib is only a journalist, and the State Department today says its Swiss representatives have still been unable to have access to him.
Just a short while ago, the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations responded to reporters' questions on the Saib affair, but he shed no light on where Saib is at this moment, nor would he go into the exact charges against the reporter. The ambassador did, however, react angrily to a reporter's statement that Saib was an invited guest in Iran who had been treated badly.
We did not send any invitation to any correspondent. We simply declared that visas would be given to those who wish to come to Iran and to see the war front. No specific invitation, definitely not to anybody and not to this gentleman. And he was not the only American who came and not the only reporter who came. Others have been treated properly and hospitably. They have seen those sites and those places that they wanted to see, and they left safely. This man must have done something wrong.
The Iranian ambassador will be a guest on Larry King Live tonight, beginning at 9 Eastern Time.
U.S. and Soviet relations included handshakes, smiles, and jokes today. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev met with a delegation from this country that included Henry Kissinger and Jeane Kirkpatrick. Journalists overheard Gorbachev trading quips with several of the Americans before the official talks started. The U.S. group is in the Soviet Union on private business.
Debate is underway in the Senate at this hour on a $20 billion clean water bill President Reagan vetoed as too costly. The Senate is expected to follow the House's lead and override the veto today. Senate Democratic leader Robert Byrd of West Virginia says there is strong bipartisan support for this measure. The bill would help fund the cleanup of the nation's lakes and rivers and give cities money to build sewage treatment plants.
But I would like to share one or two.
The Senate also is trying to finish work on a massive highway bill. New complications have surrounded the measure. Yesterday, the Senate approved an amendment that allows states to raise speed limits to 65 miles per hour, but only on interstate highways in rural areas. Now, the Senate may consider dropping the speed limit, the measure, in efforts to work out a compromise with the House on its highway bill. For more on the impact of a 65-mile-per-hour speed limit, we have this report from CNN's Tony Clark.
On the nation's...
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
Students at Gerald Saab's prep school in Kansas, among those anxiously waiting for confirmation, the Wall Street Journal reporter will be released tomorrow. Iran permanently expelled him for alleged spying. And the cup comes back home to America. Thanks to the Stars and Stripes, we'll talk about yachting's highest honor with our own yachtsman, Ted Turner. Good afternoon and welcome to the International Hour. In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw.
And from our headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Ralph Wenge. There are still no clear answers today to the mystery of Terry Waite's disappearance in Beirut, but unofficial indications are growing that the Anglican envoy is being held by Muslim extremists. It is now 15 days since Waite left his Druze bodyguards to negotiate for the kidnappers of 2 American hostages. Britain's Beirut embassy is working nearly full-time on tracking Waite down, and today, Ambassador John Gray crossed into the Muslim sector in hopes of learning some more. Following the story for us in Cyprus, Brent Sattler.
Diplomats at the British Embassy in East Beirut confirm that the ambassador crossed to the Muslim sector of the city this morning. The ambassador would not run the risk of making a second trip to the west side unless there was a reasonable chance of returning with fresh information. He crossed last week on the instructions of the Foreign Office to make contact at first hand with those who have influence. It's known that last time he met Walid Jumblat, the Druze leader, whose militia were guarding Terry Waite until shortly before he disappeared. Jumblat, it's now understood, sent word that the ambassador should make a return visit, but neither Lambert nor the Foreign Office are saying what news, if any, the Druze chieftain has to pass on. Meanwhile, a usually reliable Muslim source in Beirut claims that Terry Waite is now being held in the Bir al-Abid district of the city. It says the hostage negotiator was put before an Islamic court, which, after hearing statements by a number of leading Shiite fundamentalists, ordered that Waite be detained. There's no way of telling if the latest reports about Waite are anything more than another in a long line of rumors. But if he was called to account by some kind of kangaroo court, it might explain why he's referred to as being detained or under house arrest rather than being kidnapped. Brent Sadler, ITN, Cyprus.
As the U.S. Navy beefs up its forces off Lebanon, the White House is trying to dampen any speculation about a possible attack. 22 American warships are reported in the eastern Mediterranean right now, and Pentagon sources say 5 more are on the way from Spain. Muslim kidnappers have threatened to kill American hostages if the U.S. attacks, but a White House spokesman urged reporters not to jump to conclusions about a possible attack. The spokesman says a temporary buildup like this one is not unusual in times of increased tension.
In Israel, a parliamentary committee probing Israel's role in the Iran arms affair says the testimony of 2 key officials backs up Israel's story. The committee questioned Imran Nir, the prime minister's terrorism advisor, and David Kimke, a former official with the foreign ministry. Both men played a role in the U.S. arms deals with Iran. The Senate Intelligence Committee says its evidence suggests that Israel initiated the arms deal, but Israel's committee says its investigation shows that Israel was merely assisting its old friend, the United States. Israel also says it was not involved in the alleged diversion of funds to the Nicaraguan Contras. The Contras also have repeatedly said they were not aware of any diversion of funds to them. And Contra leader Adolfo Calero made this clear again today at a news conference here in Washington.
Mr. North never told me that we would get funds from Iran, from Israel, or from any other place. As far as the opening up of 3 bank accounts in Switzerland, we never knew about it, much less had any accounts or access to them.
Calero was asked about the Senate Intelligence Committee report. It said Oliver North told Attorney General Meese that the Contras expressed appreciation for the money. Calero replied, "I cannot express appreciation for something I did not receive." Aiding the Contras was reportedly part of another controversial weapons deal as well, the sale of AWACS radar planes to Saudi Arabia in 1981. The New York Times today reports part of that deal included Saudi promises to aid the Nicaraguan Contras and other anti-communist resistance groups around the world. But State Department spokesman Charles Redmond today said the U.S. sold radar planes to the Saudis for the reasons it gave at the time.
The AWACS sale to Saudi Arabia was based on U.S. vital interests in the security of the Gulf, the free flow of oil, and the security of Saudi Arabia. Those reasons for the sale stand on their own merits, and I have no indication of anything beyond those reasons.
The first of the $8.5 billion worth of planes were delivered last year.
Iran's news agency says Wall Street Journal reporter Gerald Saib will be expelled from Tehran tomorrow. An earlier report said Saib had already been expelled. The discrepancy hasn't been explained. Saib went to Iran to report on the war between Iran and Iraq. Iranian officials arrested him on Saturday and accused him of being a spy. Well, Iran's ambassador to the UN says his country must have had a compelling reason to detain Saib.
We did not send any invitation to any correspondent. We simply declared that visas would be given to those who wish to come to Iran and to see the war front. No specific invitation, definitely not to anybody and not to this gentleman. And he was not the only American who came and not the only reporter who came. Others have been treated properly and hospitably. They have seen those sites and those places that they wanted to see, and they left safely. This man must have done something wrong.
By the way, the ambassador will be appearing on CNN's Larry King Show tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock West Coast time, and he'll also be answering questions from viewers. Gerald Saib's relatives say...
Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
As we told you earlier in the International Hour, the U.S. Navy is beefing up its forces in Lebanon right now. 22 American warships are reported in the eastern Mediterranean, and Pentagon sources say 5 more of them are on the way from Spain. Well, joining us now in the International Hour to talk more about this and try to assess the situation is Michael Collins Dunn, the Middle East expert. He is the editor of 4 Defense and Foreign Affairs publications, the Defense and Foreign Affairs Daily, Weekly, and Monthly, and the Defense Handbook. And he also teaches at Georgetown Arab Studies Center. How would you assess what is happening over there right now? Are you seeing any signs of an imminent attack?
Well, we're certainly putting a substantial amount of American forces into the Mediterranean. We have 2 carrier battle groups there and 2 marine amphibious groups now in the Mediterranean. That looks like we're at least sending a message. Now, it may just be showing the flag. One of the problems is, what do you do? Who do you attack? What do you blow up? Because we have perhaps some knowledge of where some of the hostages are being kept, but even so, it's a very delicate matter to go in there. And if you're trying a special operations hostage rescue, then the carrier battle group is not the most subtle or refined method of doing it. So what is it we plan to do? Perhaps we plan to attack some training camps or something, but I would suggest that we're also just showing the flag right now and keeping our options open in case the opportunity to do something or the necessity for doing something does emerge.
Well, if we look closely at recent history, we find that the Pentagon has been pretty reluctant to take any kind of military action or military retaliation unless the value of such action outweighed the risks. Is the Pentagon trying to tell us something about this?
Well, we've certainly been burned before in Lebanon, and I think the lessons of Lebanon 1982-83 have been learned. I think there is a certain reluctance. There's still some question about how successful the military attack on Libya last April was, yet that was a case where we had a clear-cut target, where we had somebody and something you could clearly go after. Now, the only thing that occurs to me as having any effect here, other than just making you feel good, maybe, political bonus, the only thing that would have any effect would be an attempt to actually rescue hostages. But there are a number of different groups holding hostages of a number of different nationalities. They're scattered around the suburbs of Beirut, and some are in the Bekaa Valley. They take a very elaborate special operations force, and the only way you can do that kind of a hostage rescue is with the element of surprise, the way Israel did in Entebbe. Nobody expected them to be there, so naturally they couldn't be there, so they succeeded. You don't surprise anybody with 2 carrier battle groups steaming offshore.
You were talking about Libya. There was pretty much of a common belief in the defense area that our attack on Libya actually worked. Do you think that terrorism has diminished as a result of that strike?
Why are we in the mess we're in right now in Lebanon if terrorism has diminished? In the wake of the American attack, we had a number of terrorist incidents in Europe. Colonel Gaddafi stayed underground a little bit for a couple of months, but when he came back strong. I would question whether we really accomplished that much, but still I don't think it's a clear parallel, because there's nobody as obvious as Gaddafi or as official as the Libyan army, the Air Force, that you can strike at here.
Is the fear factor something that can work there? Are the people that might be holding the hostages really concerned, really fearsome that they're just going to be bombed up?
I don't think so. The people who are holding the hostages have their own particular agenda. That agenda has been held with everybody against them in a country where war is constant. Frankly, I don't think the lessons of our presence in Beirut, when we had the New Jersey sitting offshore shelling targets in Lebanon and still lost our Marine barracks and still lost our embassy, I don't think that shows that the people in Lebanon who are trying to commit these acts are behaving rationally, and therefore I don't think they're going to understand the big stick.
Let's look at other choices, possible choices. What about a strike against Iran?
Well, a strike against Iran obviously has some merit, because Iran certainly is indirectly at least involved in the taking many of these hostages. It might not be something we would want to do right now, because it would bring Iran back into the headlines still more at a time when politically the White House is trying to forget about Iran. But a strike against Iran, to be effective, would have to be more than just a punitive strike against a training camp, say. It would almost have to be something which would hurt Iran's ability to wage war. You've got to remember, Iranian cities are under bombing day and night now anyway. Iraq is bombing Iran. So our dropping a few more bombs is not going to change life in Tehran or anywhere else very greatly. And the only way we could make a difference would be to punish Iran in a way which would make a difference to its ability to wage war with Iraq. And I don't think we're prepared to do that. Also, we're massing in the Mediterranean. The assets we have in the Gulf are a few destroyers and frigates. We have the Kitty Hawk coming across the Indian Ocean now, but it's still some distance out. I don't think we're in a position to take action against Iran right now.
Do you suppose that the build-up in the Mediterranean had anything to do with Iran's decision to expel Mr. Saib?
On the track record of Iranian behavior, I would suspect not. I would suspect it's a matter of internal politics, that Mr. Saib was taken as part of the rivalry still going on within the Iranian leadership, the same rivalry which led to the revelation of the American deals. And as a result, I would be inclined to think that his arrest and his expulsion are going to be related to internal dynamics in Iran that have nothing to do with what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean, a long way from Iran.
And so you think that the bottom line here would be that an attack in that area would be a mistake?
I think it would jeopardize the safety of the hostages without necessarily accomplishing anything except making us feel good.
All right. Michael Collins Dunn, Middle East expert, thank you very much for joining us today on the International Hour.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more right after this.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
On most of the things that you've said in your political diatribe, you were just flat wrong.
Attorney General Edwin Meese defends the president's civil rights policies as the Reagan administration faces some rough going on Capitol Hill. This is Newswatch. I'm Mary Alice Williams in New York.
I'm Lou Waters in Atlanta. Hello. Shortly after members of the Senate Judiciary Committee got done butting heads with Attorney General Meese today, they joined the rest of the Senate in turning thumbs down on the president's proposal that members of Congress and other top-level federal officials receive hefty pay increases. The House, under the gun for failing to take action on the issue, followed suit later in the day. It passed a homeless aid bill which contains a provision rescinding the pay raises. Prior to the vote, though, one congressman complained about linking the two issues.
We are faced with two choices today: a vote for a big spending homeless bill